Ho ho ho, motherfuckers, it's Christmas. Well, it's not as I'm recording this unspecified date in December, but unless I seriously fuck up, this video should be releasing around Christmas. You know what I think of when I think of Christmas? Capitalism. Capitalism is how I obtained a DVD of the 1970 Doctor Who story, Doctor Who and the Silurians. But believe it or not, there are people out there who associate Christmas with nostalgia, namely people who are not as jaded as I am. And they're not valid. In this video essay, I will be explaining why your childhood was a lie. Well, sort of, depending on who you are. A Christmas Story is a 1983 movie based on a 1966 book called In a God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. Wikipedia helpfully classifies it as a comedy film, which is useful because it's a bit of a deep cut. I didn't notice that on my first viewing. The plot is very simple. The Wikipedia plot synopsis is only 236 words long. For context, I said 203 words in this video so far. And that's not even a terribly accurate length, since all but 76 of the words in the summary are about events that take place at the very end of the movie and don't take very long. So let's go over the plot of the movie. Meet Ralphie. All he wants for Christmas is a Red Ryder BB gun. People tell him he can't have it because it's dangerous, but he still wants it anyways. He gets to Christmas Day having not convinced anyone that he should be allowed to have the BB gun, but he gets it anyways. Complaint 1. There's a lot of filler. This movie's interesting because there's also additional scenes, which have literally no bearing on the main plot, but are still included. If you cut them, the movie would probably be about 45 minutes and could fit into a standard TV slot, but because the main plot is so simple, they need to pad the space by adding shit about Ralphie having to wear pajamas he doesn't like, or Ralphie's friend getting his tongue stuck on a frozen pole. These are really common experiences because this entire story is nostalgia bait, which I'll get a bit into later, but it also relates to Complaint 2. Ralphie's motivations are fucking stupid. Usually in a movie, we as the audience are explicitly told what the main character's motivations are. It's pretty difficult to write the movie such that it can be inferred from context, especially with as little time a movie has compared to a book or TV show. In musical theater, there's this thing called the I Want song, which is a song that explicitly sets out what a character's motivations are. So I have a problem with Ralphie's motivations, but not because of a lack of subtlety. Kids might not understand the hints at Ralphie's desires. It's hard to hint at things like that, and also the story can't happen if Ralphie never tells anyone he wants the BB gun. The problem with Ralphie's motivations is that we're supposed to agree with him. There are protagonists in stories who we're supposed to disagree with, but this is certainly not one of them. Now, why might we not agree with Ralphie's motivations? Oh yeah, because him getting what he wants involves giving a weapon to a 9-year-old. Something that's awfully fucking pertinent right now. You see, something that has changed since when the movie was released in 1983 is the shift from the main gift for children being toys to it being video games and electronics. Nowadays, if a parent refuses to get a gift for a child on the grounds that it's dangerous, they are almost always objectively factually incorrect. If this movie was made now, the gift in question would be a violent video game, and the parents would objectively be wrong. However, the BB gun could be and ended up being dangerous, so they were right. I'm going to assume the people who are watching this who have had an experience of their parents refusing a gift because it's dangerous, we're talking about a violent and or fuck saying video game. And in that case, I see why you empathize with Ralphie, because a gift you wanted got rejected because of a reason pulled so far out of somebody's ass that it came out their mouth. It's a reasonable thing to assume, but it's a false equivalence. Complaint 3. The plot is bland. I sort of already talked about this when I was making fun of how simple it is, but a simple plot can be good. I also wasn't including the B, C, D, F, G, H, I, J, or K plots. Now, I don't like how none of these things relate to the plot, but that's a matter of personal taste. But them being unconnected is not the only problem with their existence. To me, there are two types of good ways to do subplots. I'm going to call these the whisk plot and the tree plot. The tree plot is when a bunch of unrelated events collide in such a way that they all eventually converge and create a singular plot line by the end of the story. This is the standard sitcom episode structure, where there are 2 or 3 plots which all connect near the end of the episode in such a way that it resolves all of them. A good example of a longer story with this structure is each season of Stranger Things. The whisk plot works in the same way, except there is one inciting incident. An example of this is Phineas and Ferb Candace Against the Universe. That sounds like a joke, but it's not. It's literally an example of this, and it's a good example. This is much more common in movies, where it's important that we see why the time we're looking at these characters is right now. In fact, it's very rare for a movie to follow one character and also another character who's connected to the first in a completely unrelated way. And this is where A Christmas Story fails. It almost feels like it should be a 4-episode Netflix miniseries in which one side quest with the parents and one side quest with Ralphie and his friends happens per episode. And that makes sense, because the book it's adapted from is a short story collection. It doesn't work when it's adapted to film. It's the same reason why people didn't like the 2004 movie adaptation of I, Robot. It's very hard to adapt a short story collection to film. They did my boy Asimov dirty. However, even if we switch to an episodic structure, that doesn't make the main plot good. Ralphie doesn't have any plans to get the BB gun other than just asking for it incessantly? And that makes sense. He's supposed to be 9, but it makes for a boring story because it just consists of the same thing over and over again, just on a different backdrop. He does it to his parents, he mentions it to his teacher, and to a needlessly aggressive mall Santa who all give the exact same canned response. Which raises an interesting point that I think is one of the few good things about the movie. It's told by the adult Ralphie, who I'm going to be calling Big Ralph because I think it's funny. This narrative choice allows for an interpretation in which certain more absurdist elements of the story are completely figments of Ralphie's imagination, which is good and the one thing about this movie I do genuinely like, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword because it also brings into question every element of the movie. How much is every source of conflict in this movie overblown by the fact that it's being remembered by an idiot child? In reality, that mall Santa probably just told Ralphie the BB gun is dangerous in the same way the parents did, but he reinterpreted it as being more aggressive because he wasn't expecting a mall Santa to say that. He expected the mall Santa to be supportive in his endeavors because he still thinks Santa's real and doesn't think Santa is legally liable for any damages caused by the gifts he gives to children. If my kids wanted a dangerous toy for Christmas, I tell them Santa won't get them dangerous gifts because if anything happened, he could get sued. But the potential that any scene could be exaggerated isn't used to good effect in some other good movies to create a sense of ambiguity. It's just there so they don't have to explain away the less plausible parts of the movie. Big Ralph isn't looking back, not really. It would be functionally the same movie if Big Ralph wasn't there. It would just be slightly less interesting. Well, there's another reason to be different, but I'll get back to that later. In Big Ralph's memory, he just asked his parents to let him have the BB gun repeatedly, and that works. Now, we have no way of knowing if that's actually what happened, but if it did, which I'm going to say it did because it doesn't make any sense that he'd forget making an argument in favor, that's a really boring story. It's the equivalent of saying, "Are we there yet?" so many times that the answer is eventually yes. Ralphie doesn't need to come up with a plan or anything to get his parents to get him the BB gun. He just needs to not shut the fuck up about it enough that they know the risk of injury is worth it to get their son to love them. It was the 40s. Kids didn't love their parents. The parents were fucking shitty to them. What this story is fundamentally saying on a thematic level is you don't need to fight or argue for what you want. All you need to do is ask hard and frequently enough that whoever has the power to give you what you want will give it to you in order to get you to shut the fuck up. In that way, it is like the "Are we there yet?" scenario. If you ask enough times, your parents will eventually lie and say almost in the hopes that you will forget about it before the amount of time that can be considered almost is up. So, of plot, theme, and character, A Christmas Story has failed at 2. The third is character, and I think this is the most egregious one. There's this term I use a lot for stories that follow the same plot structure as A Christmas Story. The Tom Sawyer plot. I call it that because it's the type of story that The Adventures of Tom Sawyer follows. As a kid, I hated Tom Sawyer because the book didn't feel like one coherent story until the second half of the book. A Tom Sawyer plot is a plot in which there is little to no overarching plot, and it's mostly just a series of things happening to the main characters. In order for a Tom Sawyer plot to be good, either the events need to build on each other or there needs to be character development. Or both. I'm going to do a proof by contradiction, so let's start with the events building on one another. There's one plot point in A Christmas Story that relies on events in another plot line. One of the plot lines revolves around Ralphie's dad getting pissed at the heating and swearing a lot. In a later scene, Ralphie says fuck. He said fuck, not fudge. The dialogue says fudge, but he said fuck. That's a fact. His mom washes his mouth out with soap because Ralphie is a boomer. He claims he learned how to say fuck from his friend when said friend got Ralphie's other friend's tongue stuck to a flagpole as a form of karmic punishment. He then worries about going blind from ingesting soap, not knowing that in this time period he's more likely to go blind from measles. That is one example of events building on each other, and it's the only time a plot point affects anything outside of its own plot line aside from a passing mention. Character development is more complicated and more subjective. Ralphie undergoes little to no character development. He's a kid, so it makes sense that he has no character, but he has at least one character trait. He wants the BB gun. And that doesn't change. It's the most stereotypical Christmas movie trope to go from someone thinking about Christmas materialistically to thinking about it in some other framework, i.e. giving, family, whatever. But he doesn't do that. Ralphie's just an obnoxious kid who won't shut the fuck up about his material possessions. If this most basic form of character development that traces its way back to a Christmas book from 1843 was used, the movie would be at least tolerable. It doesn't change the other problems with its pacing, but it turns it into an inoffensive standard Christmas movie. The only characters who might undergo character development are Ralphie's parents, who are bullied into giving Ralphie what he wants. But that's not character development. We never see them learn the error of their ways or even see them hint at being whittled down to giving him the BB gun. They just do it. And because Ralphie didn't actually try to do anything to convince them to let him have the BB gun besides just ask for it, there wasn't any sort of conflict between him and who are functionally the antagonists of the movie. Imagine if in Harry Potter, Harry asks Voldemort to please stop killing people repeatedly, and eventually he just does. But add in that Harry had no plan besides just asking nicely and underwent no character development because he's so convinced that asking nicely is going to work. Now, there is a certain element of being accurate to the book. The book is supposed to be autobiographical, so it isn't terribly narratively interesting. I talked about this in my Colin Sav book video. It's over an hour long, you don't have to watch it. But if you're writing an autobiography and you're going to keep all the details the same, you'd better have an interesting life, because I'm sorry, Jean, but your life isn't interesting enough to warrant a movie about. And to me, that's the main thing about this movie that I hate. Why the fuck are we seeing this? What about this kid is unique that makes us want to see his December rather than anyone else on the planet? And there's nothing. He's unremarkable. To an extent, that's the point, but it doesn't help. Watching boring things happen isn't made better just because the people who made it knew it was boring. For whatever reason, A Christmas Story is really popular. It, along with All I Want for Christmas Is You and the Lexus December to Remember sales event, form the holy trinity of please fucking stop. And people are very angrily defending it. I can calmly explain why I don't like A Christmas Story, and then they get really pissed. Now, I don't know if that's what I'm doing now, but that's not the point. So this was what actually inspired me to make this video. There was this tweet that was about picking 3 Christmas movies out of 12. That's 4 on my fingers. That stay and the other 9 are deleted. I said I'd just be happy to see Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and A Christmas Story die, and a bunch of people didn't like that, and by a bunch I mean 6. I don't have as articulate opinions about Rudolph, so I wouldn't make a video about it. I just personally think it's really boring. 2 of them were specifically about Rudolph, so I won't read them here, but I'll read the other 4. This is an iPod. I'm using my phone as a teleprompter, so there's actually nothing on this. This is anti-Midwestern bias. I'm from Iowa. This movie is set in Ohio, which is a legitimate complaint since Ohio sucks. The only question is if this should be reported as abusive or misleading. And this is the one that made me want to make this video just out of spite. I'm sure your 5 followers will be on the edge of their seats with anticipation. More people than just my followers see my tweets, and also this guy is not allowed to make fun of me for anything. He runs a Twitter account for sports, which has 1,600 followers, which is sadder than having 0 followers for something good. This guy is too old to make fun of someone for having fewer followers than him. He looks like he divorced his wife to marry a barely of age girl because he thinks he's a celebrity now. He also appears to be a cop, which, ew. Anyways, now let's talk about the last comment, which is a meme. I put it on screen, I'm not going to read it, but the block of text is my original tweet. I don't know if the person who made this meme misunderstood the meme format or the intention of my tweet, but this reaction was exactly what I wanted. I don't care if the people on that thread were moved by me simply saying a movie is bad and not explaining why. Like, of course that isn't going to change anything. Anyways, this is all to illustrate that this movie is like Jesus. If you bring it up to the average American in a negative light, they will find you. And the reason is because of the nostalgia. Now, there's an element of it that's just Gen X and older millennials being offended that you said something from their childhood is bad, but there's also an element of nostalgia for the boomers like Longhorn Steakhouse Chris Farley here. The movie was engineered to appeal to boomer nostalgia. For some reason, it's a tradition a lot of people have to watch the same Christmas movie every year, as if you won't get tired of it. And this is a really popular choice for that reason. A lot of boomers felt nostalgic from it, so during the nostalgia season, they wanted to watch it. Now, there's an interesting aspect to this nostalgia. It almost feels artificial. I feel like that's one of the reasons why the pacing is so weird. They needed to cram as many cookie-cutter boomer nostalgia stories in as possible, and it makes it feel stilted. Like we've got washing your mouth out with soap for saying fuck, being forced to wear clothes you don't like for literally no reason, someone at school getting their tongue stuck to a metal thing, awaiting a frivolous piece of trash you ordered by mail order, wearing a bunch of layers in order to go to school in the winter. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it makes boomers feel nostalgic for the whole movie, which makes its continued popularity that much stranger. Some of these things are universal, but people aren't still getting pieces of cardboard by mail order. It's just that the movie also has some sort of nostalgic energy. Like the song Fireflies. It is probably partially nostalgic to me because it was popular when I was a kid, but it also has a nostalgic energy. I don't know how much of this in A Christmas Story is due to it being a Christmas movie, how much of it's due to the presence of Big Ralph, and how much of it's due to the cinematography and soundtrack, but it gives off that energy. And that says something powerful too. Nostalgia is a powerful emotion. They don't necessarily need to make the movie good if its sole selling point is nostalgia. It even worked on reviewers. It has an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes, and what do you know, most film critics are either boomers or the age of people who grew up with this movie, which means that I am an objectively morally superior human being because I don't have nostalgia bias. And that's the main factor. People are nostalgic and just either turn their brains off or barely had one when they last watched it. So I'm requesting that if you like this movie going into this video, first off, good on you for watching a 20-minute video about why a movie you like is bad, actually. And second off, watch the movie again if you still like the movie after I poked holes in it. If you're watching this video as it comes out and I haven't fucked anything up, it's thematically appropriate. I'm calling this a conclusion because I don't know what else to call it, but basically those are my thoughts on A Christmas Story. I'll hopefully make more than 4 videos next year. I have a lot of ideas, but I actually need to research and write them, and I want to try to release them in a specific order, so that's been hard. And also my projects have gotten more ambitious. I can't just squeeze a video out in a day like I used to. My next video should be Grass Simulator 16, but if that doesn't work for whatever reason, or you want to know about my bigger projects, my next video will probably be about either 1984 or Doctor Who, and it'll be like this, but with a purpose.